Good morning, everyone. Sorry for starting a few minutes late, but we're ready to go now. And today we're going to show a few things that we've been working on past month. We spent a lot of December fixing bugs and had less time with the holidays. We have quite a bit of changes coming up in the next few days coming out. We should have 2 blog posts coming up associated with these 2 changes as well. They're both in review right now and should be published later today or tomorrow. The first thing we're going to go through is the beta 2 of the Declarative Pipeline, which just came out in the 0.81 release of the pipeline model definition plugin. And then we'll go through all the changes that we've made when the SCM API, the branch API, which includes changes to the GitHub branch source, the GitHub organization folder, the BitBucket branch source, Mercurial plugin, Git plugin, and I think that might be all of them, but there might be a couple more, and Stephen Connolly will take us through that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrew Bayer to show us what's new in the Declarative Pipeline syntax.
All right. Yep, there we go. Now I'm sharing. And everyone, we're recursive. All right, so I'm not actually going to demo anything. I'm just going to walk you through what now is the full syntax for Jenkins Declarative Pipelines as of version 0.81. And this will be the core of the syntax going forward through 1.0 and beyond. We will not be making any more backwards compatibility breaking changes to this syntax. So while we may add additional functionality, we're not going to change any of this existing syntax. Let's start at the top. There's the pipeline block. Ooh. And within there, there's a few different ways you can specify your agent. You do have to have one and only one agent specified at the top level. So this is not valid Jenkins file right here, since I have 6, but 7. So let's walk through the configurations that are possible. Agent any means run on any agent without caring about what labels on it, etc. Agent none means that at the top level, we're not running on any agent at all. So if you need to actually be on an agent to, run a compilation, etc., you're going to have to control that in each of the stages directly, either via node block or agent on the stage. Here we're saying that we can run on any agent that has the label whatever. And here we're saying run on any agent and run in a container based on the Docker image for Ubuntu 16.04. Here, along the same lines, run on any agent, and then build from Dockerfile in the root directory of your repository and run in that. And then for further options for agent Docker and agent Dockerfile, you can specify the label for the agent to run on. You can specify the image at that point, or you have to specify the image at that point once you've gone to the additional options. You can specify additional arguments to pass to Docker. And with Dockerfile, you can override the name of the Docker file of the file we're using to build if it's not named Dockerfile or if it's in a different path. And again, the label to run on and the additional arguments. The next section is not required. It's environment. This, oddly enough, sets environment variables. And you can have them referencing each other. And perhaps most notably, you can set environment variables to a credentials ID, so that when you've got your SSH creds or username password creds for something defined, you can just do credentials ID of that credentials, and it'll end up in your build's environment without you having to think about exactly what's going on. The tools block, go away out the window. I should note that tools only works when you're not on Docker or Dockerfile agent. It only works on a bare agent, as it were. This is syntactic sugar and shortcuts for auto-installing the traditional Jenkins tools that it's always been able to auto-install and getting them on your path. You have the combination of Maven being the symbol for the Maven tool, and then the name of a configured tool installation, in this case, Maven 339, and now it'll get auto-installed and put on the path. Again, this also assumes that you're actually on an agent, or else it won't do anything. Options is kind of a catch-all for a bunch of different things that apply across the whole build. For example, here we've got the general Jenkins build job properties like build discarder to, well, throw out old builds. So right now there's only one declarative specific option, but there could be more in the future. This option allows you to skip the default checkout that occurs behind the scenes normally. And wrapper steps, for lack of a better term. If you want to have your entire build wrapped in a echoing timestamps or in a timeout or a retry or things like that, you can specify those here and they'll apply to the entire build. You can also use those same steps within your individual stages in your steps blocks there, but that will just apply to what is contained in them. So you can define triggers for your builds. Right now, I think actually with 271, Jenkins 271, I think cron may be the only one you can actually define this way, because we require the symbol and not the more complicated legacy metastep syntax. But in newer versions of Jenkins, you can also define an SCM trigger. I believe you can also do an upstream trigger. The like, and that's of course separate from GitHub organization folders or multi-branch pipelines that kick off automatically based on checking with GitHub or BitBucket, etc. Next, we get to build parameters. This is still imperfect. You still have to run your build once before you will get prompted for those parameters the next time you run. But a recent change to pipeline added the params global variable. So if you do params.param name, even if you don't actually, on that first run when no one's actually specified a value for your parameter, you'll get the default value that's set for that parameter so that you can avoid those inconvenient nulls or parameter not found, etc. And now we get to the big meat of it, the stages. Stages is required. You need to have at least one stage because otherwise you're not doing anything. A stage has a name and then a block of configuration. Environment, tools, and agent are all optional in stage. You don't need them. They'll override the top level's configuration for those or contribute additionally. So here, where we're setting the environment variable foo, since we already had that defined at the top level environment, we're overriding it. If it was a new variable, that would be added to the environment instead. Tools will, again, override if you're overriding an existing already configured tool and add a new one if need be. And agent will run this stage on a different agent. Agent none does nothing. You will still end up eating the executor that the top level agent is using, assuming you didn't do agent none there. Yep. Now there's two additional optional sections in stage. that aren't also available at the top level. First of those is when. It's conditional execution of this stage. It will only run this stage if the when condition is true. Right now, you can only have one condition. You can't have multiple conditions. So again, this is not valid syntax, but you know. And there's three ways that you can check your conditions. The first is to only run if the branch you're on matches this ant style pattern. Here it's just, I don't have a pattern in, but */master or something like that works as well. The environment condition will check to see that I've got an environment called variable named foo in my environment, and that it's set to not bar. And if it isn't, either doesn't exist or it has a different value, we will not continue the build. We will not execute this stage. And lastly, there's expression, which is more of a power user option. It will only run this stage if the expression doesn't return false or null. So if it returns true or 1 or banana, then it will continue. And you can run any pipeline steps inside the expression block. You just need to make sure you've got a return at the end, or it won't really do much. And you don't actually technically need to have that return there, but I tend to do it just to make sure I don't mess up and not have a return. And the other optional section is post. We'll see this again at the end of the build, because post can be used both at the top level and in individual stages. And it works basically the same way in both cases. It runs at the end of the stage or build, depending on whether the conditions are met. You can have multiple conditions that need to be met. So this is valid syntax here. And the conditions are the name of the condition and then a block of pipeline script that does still need to be in the declarative style. So always will always run. The next one that's checked is changed, whether the build status currently is different than the previous build's build status. And then lastly, we check the success, failure, unstable build statuses and aborted, but that one tends to be weird. So I just mentioned success, failure, and unstable. Obviously, only one of those can actually be true at a time. But yep, they check the current build status and respond accordingly. Steps is the required section. And it's where you put your actual work. So here, I'm echoing things, I'm doing a retry, which is kind of pointless since that will never fail, but and the script block here allows you to run any arbitrary pipeline script, even if it doesn't fit into the declarative subset. There are certain things you can't do in declarative, like, for example, in a normal declarative block. For example, you can't do if statements or loops. And so if you really need to do those kinds of things, or you need to invoke Docker image inside directly yourself for various reasons, then script is your answer. Think of it as an escape hatch to be able to use, get to power user functionality. One thing that is worth mentioning, such that I've made a second stage for it, is that if you want to use parallel in your steps, it has to be the only step at the top level of that stage. It's either parallel or a block of steps. Parallel itself obviously contains blocks of steps, but you can't mix both parallel and other steps like we have up here in the same stage. And again, there's post at the end of the build. will reach post no matter what's happened earlier in the build. So even if the build has failed due to compilation errors in your code or whatever, we will still get here and be able to evaluate the conditions and respond accordingly. And that's that. Okay. I'm done.
Okay. I hope my last minute preparation behind the scenes has actually succeeded.
Oh, and I am actually going to add a link to this. I'm going to do a blog post actually probably next week that will flesh this out a little bit further and have the full syntax documentation up on jenkins.io/blog.
I presented you everything now, Stephen.
Okay, all right. Let me just tidy some things up. Right. Okay. So, do you want me to start from an existing one or start from scratch? What do you think makes more sense? Says the very prepared person. Okay, I'll start from the multi-branch experience with the new model. I'll just create a separate multi-branch and then I'll show some things with the old one, or rather with the new. So we have quite a number of changes to the multi-branch plugins and to the SCM API, and we talked about them last month, but there was some tightened security on my instance, so I couldn't actually do the proper demo. And then there's some additional tweaks that we've added in that just are nice bits of spit and polish to try and shine it up a bit more. So if we start off, I'm going to create something, a GitHub organization here. Now, previously, as soon as you'd actually created the GitHub organization folder, it would start indexing at that point straight away, which would then fail and blow up on using anonymous credentials and all that sort of stuff. So no longer does it do that. And so this means we can actually change the configuration before we actually do anything. So I'm just going to remove some stuff. That's all fine. Oh, I want to keep one item. And then, right, so then let's hit save. So at this point, it does the scan. Now, there's a couple of things that are kind of slightly new. One thing that's new is we've got all these dates of when the various actions it's coming. So you'll see those. And again, it's going and kicking off and doing all the scanning that you'd have before. The scanning is actually somewhat more efficient here, in that as soon as it identifies one that there is a Jenkins file that that one of the branches meets the required criteria, it stops scanning any further at that point. And so it should be more efficient in terms of how it uses the API rate token, rate limits on GitHub and that sort of stuff for that. And then the other thing you'll notice here is there's this events screen, and this one shows you the log of any events that have been received by the system from GitHub, because events are now being processed in a different mechanism. And then the other thing that you will start noticing immediately is previously, every time you saved the folder, or the GitHub organization folder, it would trigger a rescan. But now, if your change is not affecting any of the criteria that would determine whether or not you've got projects to be built, then it will not trigger a rescan. So it will actually stop you having these continuous rescans every time you save, which allows you to do other changes that you wouldn't ordinarily be able to do as easily. So you can like change the description, blah, blah. And if we save that, the description goes in there, and this hasn't been re-indexed, which is kind of nice. And so they're kind of little nice features to have. And then you should start seeing things showing up. Like, for instance, if you notice here, this name now actually includes the description that's coming from the repository as hover text on it. So you get those descriptions. So that's most of the visual changes that you have. The other changes, we now have automatic categorization of things here. It's less relevant at this level, but it does give you some things. So if we move into a demonstration project, and now we're in the multi-branch level. So the visual changes you have here, the first change here is you may notice that the master branch is now highlighted in bold. And that's because that's the branch that is the default branch on GitHub. So let's wander over to GitHub. Let's change the settings for this guy. And branches, master. Let's make this one the master branch. Yes, I understand. Update default. And now let's move back here. Now, at this point, I'm suspecting that it's not coming in as an event because I haven't set up that set of events yet. But if I run the indexing again, so we can see here, and we wander back up here, you'll now see the name in bold is now foobarman Chu. So you're getting the default branches now actually being reported in here as the actual branch. And I think that's a little small piece of polish, but nonetheless one that's important to have. The other one that I'm more interested in, if I go to a different repository, is, let's go to one with some pull requests. So it's cool that we've got all these pull requests here, but I don't know what any of these pull requests are. Well, actually, if you hover over the pull request name, you will actually get the tooltip. Which will actually show up. Who's nabbing at me on IRC? Yes, it would be nice if the default branch was at the top of the list, Tyler. I agree. I may tweak that in the last seconds, but you can see if we wander over to GitHub for this pull request, you'll see that's Tom's PR test is number 10. And there's the actual oh, sorry, it was James. Oh, James Nord. So that's Tom's PR test there. So that's that. Now the next bit that's kind of nice to have is the event support. So at this point, I'm going to go to a branch, and if we go to GitHub for this branch, let's wander back here, scan repository, and let's look at the events. So if I go here, we have a Jenkins file, and we can edit this. Put some change in there. Commit, and let's wander back over here. So that commits, and then we're going to get that event received. Now, there's actually a couple of things that have happened here. So for reasons that I'm still trying to figure out, at the moment, GitHub seems to be delivering the events multiple times. So you'll see here that we've actually received the event 3 times. Now, what's happened in receiving that event is we've started off one at a time, the actual checking of these remote branches. And we come along, and the first one says, oh, change is detected. We've gone from this hash to this hash, and we schedule a build. That's fine. The next one comes along and it says, oh, no changes detected because we've already got this guy as the one that we're going to build. So he says still at that one, and he does nothing. And the same for this one, and the same for this one. So what we've actually had is, and I think there was actually a fourth, yeah, there's received updated event came in again. So there was actually 4 events came in at the same time, and only one build was triggered for that, and it was triggered immediately, and that build did not require a full scan of the entire thing. It just built the only job that you're after. And we have it, and if we look at the console output, we will see building code as expected. And then finally, you'll notice that we are guaranteeing all the time to actually have the GitHub web link, so that when you click on that, you actually get the exact change there, which was another piece of polish that wasn't there before. So that's a lot of the changes in terms of the visual changes that you'll see. So the big changes you'll see are a reduction in the API rate limit usage. I estimate it's at least an order of magnitude down. There's other changes we have planned that should be able to bring that down further still. But for now, that's certainly a big improvement. The other improvement that you get is much more responsive events. So when the event occurs, rather than having to wait while it goes and scans the entire repository, it just knows to check the one branch, it checks it, and it triggers the build. And we only trigger the one build rather than triggering multiple builds, which means then we don't have to worry about multiple events coming through and triggering multiple builds. So that's that. And then at the org folder level, again, we have improved scanning there and improved configuration when it comes to actually the saving. And if we had gone and created a, so let's go and create a multi-branch pipeline demo. Multi-branch pipeline, okay. So this guy, if we add a GitHub branch source, and the owner is CloudBees, and we'll give some credentials, and we'll pick the repository demo here, and then by Jenkins file, that's okay, that's okay. And then if it's this guy. So this guy again is going to do the scanning and all those sorts of things as before. But again, much like the change configuration to organization folders, when we resave this, put that in, it's, well, in this case, it's triggering a change because there was an actual active change in terms of one of the things, but it should be suppressing the save when it's not necessary. So if I save this guy, yeah, there. So you can see in this case, it didn't suppress the save. So those are kind of the major changes. Now, what are the gotchas that you're going to have if you're upgrading? So there are a number of plugins that are affected by this. So if I go to Manage Jenkins, and we look at the plugins installed. So you have the Branch API plugin, you have the Folders plugin, you have the Git plugin, you have the GitHub API plugin, you have the GitHub Branch Source plugin, you have the GitHub plugin, you have the Pipeline multibranch plugin, and you have the SCM API plugin, and you also have the Mercurial plugin and the BitBucket plugin. So we are putting out a blog post detailing all those issues, all of those. In essence, the SCM API is technically one whereby it's compatible one way or the other. It doesn't. You can run older plugins against the new plugins compiled against the older version of the SCM API, unless they have made incorrect assumptions about internals in the SCM API. So this means that the subversion plugin is fine. We don't have to upgrade that one. At some point, we will upgrade the subversion plugin to give it better event support, but it will behave correctly because it's not made any incorrect assumptions about the internal behavior of SCM API. The Git plugin and the Mercurial plugin needed changes so that we could fix problems that were in the BitBucket and GitHub branch sources plugins. And also, it makes sense for those to have the enhanced event support. Because for those plugins, scanning repositories is a more heavyweight operation than it is for the Subversion plugin. And as a result, it's more critical to give them the faster event support. So the Git and Mercurial plugins, if you only have those installed, you don't strictly have to upgrade, but we're recommending you upgrade because it'll give you better event support. The Branch API plugin, you will want to upgrade because that delivers on the event support. And then we hit the problematic ones, which are the GitHub branch source and the BitBucket branch source and the organization folders. So those plugins made incorrect assumptions about behavior of the internals of SCM API. And as a result, if you upgrade SCM API, where that internal behavior was changed, those plugins, if you don't upgrade them, will have problems. So basically, if you're upgrading SCM API, if you have GitHub org folders, GitHub branch source, or BitBucket branch source, upgrade those plugins as well, and upgrade everything they say to upgrade. If you don't, we'd still recommend that you upgrade the other plugins as well, but you might get away with a partial upgrade without having things blow up. You'll want to upgrade them, but you don't have the same problems you would. So if you don't upgrade the BitBucket or the GitHub branch sources, then what you can end up is in a situation where the jobs fail to load as a result of those plugins failing to load. So that's kind of why we're saying those two plugins are kind of special. And then the other one that's a gotcha is you're upgrading the GitHub org folders, because that's a plugin that's being subsumed by the GitHub branch source. And if you don't upgrade that, and you have the new GitHub branch source and the old GitHub org folders, they'll both be fighting to deliver the same functionality. So hopefully I've made that as clear as possible, but there's a blog post that makes it that is much more clear than my rambling. So that's about it. Are there any questions? I see some scrolling in the IRC.
Yeah, there are some random questions. I think we'll probably continue to monitor IRC for a little bit. From there, I think, thanks Andrew and thanks Stephen for the demos. This was really good. Just want to remind everybody, we do have blogs coming up on that'll go on jenkins.io. And they should be published here in the next either today or tomorrow. Thanks everyone for attending. If you do have questions, drop them in IRC and we'll try to get to those as well. Again, we'll be doing this at the beginning of February on the second Thursday. And we hope to have some great things to show off then as well. Thanks everyone.